record. Might get a little box that asks you to accept. Hello, welcome to our Creativity and Climate Justice event this morning. We're really excited to share some incredible speakers who will be talking about their practice in this area, and then to go on to our open space discussion. So I'm Marianne, I'm the Sector Development Coordinator for Collective Encounters. We're a theatre company for social change based in Liverpool, and this is part of the Centre for Excellence in Participatory Theatre. That's a programme that looks to look at ethics and practice and what excellence means in our sector. Yeah, and we're really excited to be hosting this event just before the climax of COP tomorrow, and to hear about some amazing work from three creative practitioners. So yeah, I think we can get started. So I'm just going to share my screen. Let me find the right screen. Today's event will we asked our speakers to respond to the calling question of how can participatory arts most effectively engage with issues of climate justice. And on the right hand side you can see that our speakers today are Jess from Culture Unstained, Kuge Chuhan from Crossing Footprints, and Andrea, who is an artist and beekeeper and an artist in residence at the Blue Coat in Liverpool. So how this event will work is the first half we will have these speakers, and in the second half we will commence an open space discussion where we will name the rooms and hopefully have a really interesting and fruitful discussion about issues that have come from the speakers' presentations, or something that you have had in the back of your mind about creativity and climate justice. Brilliant. So I'll stop sharing my screen there. As you've seen, we're recording the first half today, so if you don't want to appear in that recording, please feel free to turn your cameras off. As the speakers are presenting, if you have any questions for them, please pop them in the chat, and we'll be keeping track of those as we go on. Brilliant, thank you. So, Jess, I think you're first. Harriet, can we? Oh, I can spotlight Jess. Brilliant. Hi, Jess, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Wish we could see each other in person. Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Okay, so I am going to talk about the creative campaign to remove fossil fuel sponsors from culture institutions. This is something that I've been working on for a good 10 years now in various guises. But what I'm specifically, oh, hang on, trying to move the slide, there we go. What I'm specifically going to talk about is my involvement in BP or Not BP, which is an activist theatre group, which only, oh, sorry?
Interrupt. We just can't see the top of your screen, and I don't want to miss out.
No one can either. I wonder why.
Have you got any pop-ups or anything that's blocking the top?
No, I
can the boxes. Does anyone know how we can?
So it is filling my screen.
It is filling your screen. Does anyone in the room? We can see more now. No. Perfect. Okay. Well, we can see most of it now.
Okay. Shall I just carry on? The slides are basically images.
Yeah.
Just to kind of show you examples
Someone in the chat has just said you just need to not have the Zoom boxes over the screen. So
right.
if you have anything showing.
So how do I move that?
Don't worry.
Is it okay? Shall I carry on?
If you go out of full screen and come back in, I think that might work.
If I come out of full screen.
Yeah. You can just pick them up and move them.
Share screen again.
Sorry, everyone. Oh, we've become quite the technical whiz.
Okay, and then, so how's that?
No, the greyed out boxes are still there at the top, but if you do it not on full screen, but as you had it at the last.
So just as here, just as the slide.
Yeah, that's
okay, fine.
Perfect.
All right, shall I carry on?
Yeah, please.
So yeah, so BP or Not BP is an activist theatre group, and we only perform without permission in cultural spaces that are sponsored by oil companies. So in our work, participatory performance and direct action are kind of inextricably entwined. We can't separate them. We actually sort of jokingly call ourselves activists. And we've done over 60 different disobedient performances now, using theatre, art, music, storytelling, movement, costumes, props, humour, to grab attention, to win allies, to build the movement, to persuade decision makers, and ultimately to hasten the end of the oil age. So we always have to think not just about how to bring our message to life, but also the practicalities of how to put on a compelling performance in a heavily constrained space that we can't completely control because we're not supposed to be there. So I'm going to talk about our approach, and I'm going to talk about the ways in which our use of participatory theatre has evolved over the past 10 years. And obviously the reason that we're doing this is because oil companies are using cultural sponsorship in order to create what they call their social license to operate, the permission that we as a society give them to continue doing what they're doing, in this case, destroying the climate. And there's a lot more to be said about that, but I want to focus on the practice, not the rationale for what we're doing. But because oil companies have chosen to partner with our most renowned national cultural institutions, that feels like a legitimate space for us to go and be in those spaces to challenge them. And just before we get into what we've actually done, it's been an incredibly successful campaign. Over the past few years, we've had a domino effect of wins, and I won't go through them all, but you can see from this list that a lot of major national cultural institutions have ended relationships with oil companies, particularly BP and Shell, over the last few years, and that has definitely been a response to the campaign and our activism. But I just want to emphasize that these wins are not just down to the kind of creative interventions that we've been doing as BP or Not BP and other groups have been doing. There's been a really important and fascinating interplay between external activism and internal advocacy in these organisations and within the wider cultural sector. That's been a really crucial dynamic to the success. And the creative activism has kind of catalysed a sector-wide conversation on cultural sponsorship that otherwise, of fossil fuel companies, that otherwise I think probably wouldn't have happened, or not in the same way, not sort of to the same extent. Okay, so moving on to BP or Not BP's origin story. So we set up BP or Not BP in 2012 because BP started sponsoring the Royal Shakespeare Company. And we had been very inspired by a group called Liberate Tate that was challenging Tate's sponsorship by BP using performance art. And we thought, you know, using the medium that is being sponsored to challenge the sponsorship is an incredibly powerful tactic. So what does that look like for the Royal Shakespeare Company? well, it looks like using theatre, and specifically it looks like using Shakespeare. And so we decided that what we needed to do was Shakespearean stage invasions 5 minutes before BP sponsored performances at the RSC were due to start, and that we would really use Shakespeare, draw on his words, his concepts, his characters to protest BP sponsorship in a Shakespearean style. So that's what we did. We did 6 Shakespearean stage invasions over 9 months, both in Stratford-upon-Avon and in the London theatres that the plays transferred to. Each one was different. Each one was very much inspired by the play that was being sponsored. And it had quite an impact. It was very interesting to see how the audience responded. We would get a lot of cheers and applause at the end of our performances, and maybe some boos, but then the audience would kind of like counter the boos with more cheering. And I think because they were sitting in a theatre waiting for a performance, when we got up and did a performance, they were very, very open to listen. And by the end, we were actually getting like members of the cast tweeting their support for what we were doing from backstage while we were doing it, which was rather wonderful. And the stage invasion that I did was at the Roundhouse. It's the scariest thing I've ever done. And we discovered afterwards, through talking to people who were leaving when the play had finished, that we had completely coincidentally done our stage invasion on the day when there was a corporate visit from BP employees and high-level members of the RSC. So we had actually incredibly serendipitously done it at the moment when it could have the biggest impact. So that's just sort of a sign of like, you've just got to put yourself out there and you never know what's going to happen. So we found that creativity and storytelling were really powerful tools in this campaign, that we were bringing the debate about what actions we needed to take in the face of climate breakdown kind of out of the science and the policy sphere and into the cultural sphere. And we were meeting people where they're already engaged and open and willing to kind of have this conversation. We were finding ways to talk about climate change that are attention grabbing, innovative, that aren't dry, but that also aren't sort of terrifying, that kind of, you know, engage, use humor. Also, importantly, sort of allow the expression of emotion. So rather than getting on stage and sort of chanting BP out, we were getting on stage and saying, what country, friends, is this, where the words of our most prized poet can be bought to beautify the name of a patron as unnatural as British Petroleum? Strange association. They who have incensed the seas and skies with a dark, deep water horizon, and so on and so on and so on. The other thing that we learned is when you're in performance, it's very difficult for security to remove you. So it's a very effective way of taking and holding a space. And actually, when we were performing at the Roundhouse, security got up on stage and tried to stop us. And we just sort of incorporated them into the performance. So they ended up forming a backdrop for us. So that was, we realized, a really, really useful tool as activists as well. We were very much enjoying using Shakespeare in our activism. But in 2014, the British Museum put on a Viking exhibition sponsored by BP. And that sort of started to shift our focus away from Shakespeare and allowed us to start exploring other types of disobedient performances and other types of theatre in order to make our point. Great, the phone's ringing. So we started sort of drawing on Norse myths and legends. We wanted to do something large, visually spectacular, but also we wanted to sort of explore participatory actions a bit more. So we ended up announcing in advance that we were going to bring a Viking longship into the British Museum, which meant very tight security, and they were sort of turning people away and confiscating helmets and things. But we managed to get this beautifully painted longship into the museum by just folding it into skirts and having 2 middle-aged women wearing them in, which nobody looked at twice. So we were able to do this kind of beautiful performance within the museum. And that really made us start thinking, okay, there are all kinds of possibilities here. So another example in 2015, this I wanted to give this example because it's an example of coming up with a key message first. So BP had just been found guilty of gross negligence for the Deepwater Horizon spill and had just been hit with the biggest fine in corporate history. And we wanted to draw attention to the fact that this was the sponsor of the British Museum. So we started thinking about corporate criminals and what can we do around that, and that evolved into quite an elaborate Sherlock Holmes sketch with like bumbling police officers and like a search all the way around the museum looking for this like human oil spill that represented BP. Then in 2016 our practice was evolving from these kind of well-honed agitprop sketches that made for good viral films but only involved a small number of people into an attempt to bring creative protest on a much more sort of mass scale into our cultural spaces. So this example is the Splash Mob, one of the things I'm most proud of, which was an hour-long performance involving 200 people. We had singing merfolk, we had BP pirates, we had a 40-foot sea monster, and it was a great example of sort of how we come up with creative solutions to the various constraints of the British Museum as a sort of performance and direct action space, because absolutely everything has to be smuggled past vigilant security. So to create this 40-foot Kraken puppet, we had to sort of build its smuggleability in right from the very beginning of the design process. Like, how do we actually get this thing in and then put it together and then animate it under those conditions? People had to create their own costumes and wear them in under their normal clothes. Then we all had to get ready in public in the museum really, really quickly, because as soon as we start doing that, security realised that something is up and start paying attention. The sound in the Great Court in the British Museum is really terrible. So speaking needs to be kept to a minimum. So we have to get our points across with the minimum number of words, which is an incredible performance challenge. Speaking has to be done by people with powerful voices, but singing sounds incredible. Any songs or choreographed movement has to be immediately possible for several hundred people who've just turned up on the day without any rehearsal to join in. So that they can have a meaningful experience and not just be spectators. And so lots of call and response, repurposed sea shanties with like actions that people can take, comedic BP pirates that can be booed and so on. This is another one in 2017 that was kind of a response to how do you do something visually impactful in a space that is as huge and as blank as the British Museum. So we had a Victorian choir singing repurposed Christmas carols in a gradually widening circle to distract attention from the fact that people were, and protect as well, that people were cutting out and sticking black paper onto the floor to create this massive permafrost crack that kind of grew across the floor of the whole museum. And that was also an example of like, we always need to think about health and safety for visitors and for us, and how to be disruptive without being dangerous. And this was a good example of that. How am I doing for time?
You're a bit over now if you're going to show your video as well.
Okay, so I'll just say that yeah, we've sort of always tried to express solidarity with frontline communities through our performances, but increasingly we've been making the links with decolonisation, anti-racism. You can't really be in the British Museum and not talk about these things, and that's become an increasingly important part of our practice. And then we kind of brought it all together in 2020, just before COVID, with this, our most ambitious performance, 1,500 people. We really wanted to push the boundaries with the British Museum. And so we actually did a 3-day occupation that involved a massive Trojan horse that we managed to smuggle through a side gate into the courtyard and then stay there for 2 days. And it sort of brought together all of the different themes that I've been talking about. So I'd like to just show you a short film of the performance rather than describing it, because I'm sure it's much better to watch it. So I'm going to attempt to stop sharing this screen, start sharing the film screen. Hope that you can see this okay.
It's time to take it down, to tear away that logo. This horse is not a gift, it only leads to sorrow. Beekeeping must fall, Beekeeping must fall.
There will be no museums on a dead planet. No culture left to see.
This enormous museum was filled with so many of us, and just in every corner things were popping up.
These crude and ancient fossil fools, fueling the engine of a lost cause.
And we must highlight the root causes, and it's about colonialism, racism, and capitalism.
BP is benefiting from a relationship with a repressive regime that is silencing protest and thus making it easier for BP to build its destructive and polluting pipelines. Greed from international oil companies and governments have fueled devastating conflict.
These are the companies who are facilitating the Indonesian military to intimidate and kill indigenous West Papuans.
This museum is accepting funding from a corporation that is quite literally burning my generation, future generations' futures to the ground.
BP must go.
We had the Trojan horse, we've had the mass action, and we've moved into this performance that we're calling Monument. And now members of BP Not BP are staying here overnight, and we're going to continue to cast and create a beautiful piece of artwork to show how we feel about BP being in the museum, and we're going to be here all night.
The museum is closed.
People with ADHD save 10 hours studying with this Chrome extension. But no, by all means, go ahead.
That was great, Jess. Thanks so much.
Sorry if I went over time.
I've been talking and I'm on mute. What a rookie mistake. Thank you for that insight into the evolution of BP or not BP. And I've written down that kind of idea of who is legitimate and who is illegitimate in those spaces. And I think that's a really powerful way to look at it. Okay, so we're going to swiftly move on to the next speaker and introduce Kuge Chuhan, who will be speaking about his project Crossing Footprints. Brilliant. Hi, Kooj.
Hi, thank you very much. I get the Crossing Footprints isn't a project. It's the name of a CIC, a small company, a non-profit company which I run now. And there is a project that we've been doing called Climate Connections, which has been running this year. It's just about finishing this week, so it's a bit hot off the press. I've not done a presentation about that before, but I'll introduce myself and some of the work that I've been doing briefly. Then I'll talk about that particular project. So I was originally a scientist, then I became a visual artist and a musician, then I went into film and interactive digital media, and I've been working for about 35 years around race activism in various ways, in various campaigns, as well as cultural democracy, and for the last 12-15 years looking at climate change, global warming, climate justice in particular. I'm also a member of a small collective called Virtual Migrants, and we did some work. We called it a project about climate imperialism when we began, and that's still in the background there, that idea. So we did a number of pieces of work, and there's one piece of work which we did, which was called Climate Justice, Science and Refugees. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of projects very quickly, then I'll focus on Climate Connections. One thing that we're quite interested in is the lack of representation within the climate movement around, with people from the global south in the UK, people of colour. So this particular project was working with an organisation called Manchester Refugee Support Network, and so I'm going to try and just show a few slides of some of the work that we did with that particular group. If I can go into the screen share. I've got the wrong one. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to show a few of these slides. This was, at the moment, we're looking at, this was an exhibition at the Arnolfini, which is one of the ones that preceded. Anyway, Climate Change and Testimonies from Refugees was a project that we did some time ago. And we worked with a group of people from Manchester Refugee Support Network. And we spent time working together with social scientists and other artists, as well as people from a refugee background, as well as people who weren't from refugee backgrounds, because we didn't want to just have something that was about, us looking at refugees in isolation, in a kind of voyeuristic way, perhaps, which many projects I think do. So we did a presentation, and we're trying to blur the boundaries between who's a refugee, who's a scientist, and make sure there's dialogues between the two. So this was an event we did in Manchester, and I think we involved, no, this one we didn't involve people from Platform. This was simply the organisation, and the work produced involving people from the refugee background ended up producing an installation as well, which was called By This, and this was shown at a number of places in the UK as well as in Canada for some reason. And I think one of the things about the work is to try and find, certainly about my work, is to try and find ways to have multiple voices presented that are underrepresented, and try and in ways that they can be amplified, and also develop a dialogue and develop themes that have been underrepresented before. So it's not just about trying to look at how the so-called climate movement can get more representation in it, but there's a lot of critique about what the climate movement's terms of reference are, and allowing people from underrepresented backgrounds to be able to define their own idea of what their own movement, whether it may not be called the climate movement, but there are a number of other ways of approaching the whole thing. So that's very kind of in brief that particular project. There's another project which is called Chamada from Chico Mendes. Chico Mendes was somebody who was murdered because of his climate activism in Brazil, quite a long time ago, but he's unfortunately become relatively forgotten. So this particular project was where I did an international call out to activists and artists to submit a piece of film and video, and I managed to put it together in a kind of interactive musical installation where we had pieces of climate related objects embedded in coal, and you'd be able to hit it with a drumstick. And we also had some performances along with the installation, but when you hit the drumstick, then it would trigger different voices that had been sent to me from different activists and artists across the world, and they're presented in this face here, which is actually based on Yemanya, which is a goddess of love and the sea. And the idea is it's a kind of universal, that we're all a part of this spirit, because all the different people who speak in it speak through the mask. I'm a bit worried about time, so I've got a small clip, but I think I'm going to move on instead of play. Shall I show the clip? Yeah, go on. I'll show the clip just because it's nice, I think, for people to see some work sometimes. So let's try this. It's very short. I'm going to play in the window. Different artists and filmmakers contributed that footage consciously toward the project, and so the piece itself creates an interface or a playback system for people to be able to view that different kind of, all those different bits of footage.
Knowing full well that we're going to have serious problems with regards to food.
It provides a very playful way, using musical hitting and instruments and objects related to how we consume, carbon emitting products. It covered up the pointlessness. Okay, that's just a very short clip. I thought it'd be quite nice to show you. So let me move on to a project called Climate Connections, which began when a group of libraries in Manchester, in Greater Manchester, became libraries of sanctuary. And I kind of pitched, I was actually managing this project to develop cultural activities in that set of libraries. I've always been really interested in libraries because, especially with the depletion of kind of youth and community sector in generally across the UK, libraries are still well, a number of libraries have become closed, but libraries are still very close to communities who you won't see in the centre of cities, who you won't see in art galleries or anywhere. So local people use them, people who are kind of very estranged from the cultural system that most of us are used to, and I would say that that's the majority of people in the UK. So it was, I've always been interested to work with libraries, and I pitched the idea of doing a climate-related project to some of the libraries, and a few libraries in Oldham were very interested to develop that. And they also had some money to partner with some libraries in Germany. So we started to do some climate-related work, and it's a bit of a long story, but essentially there was a kind of a competition by refugee groups in Bremen in Germany to produce climate work and have it shared within the library as well as on social media. And secondly, there was a group called Fatima Women's Association based in Oldham, who we contracted a Sufi singer, a woman called Sarah Yassin, to work with, who's really keen on climate change and wanted to kind of develop more work in that direction. She's a singer with a group called Rafiki Jazz, which I'm guessing some people here may have heard of. I've known her for a very long time, so it's really nice to see her developing. Part of my work is also to try and develop artists who haven't been involved in doing climate work but have been on the fringes of it and never done anything, to try and develop a base of artists who can work more in that direction. So as a result of that, there was a Sarah who we commissioned. We also commissioned a woman called Emmanuella Yogalelo from Democratic Republic of Congo, who's also shown a lot of interest, and we commissioned her to produce a short piece. She traveled to Congo recently, a couple of months ago, after the pandemic allowed people to do that, and she took some footage there, and we produced again a short social media piece there with some of the work that she did. The third guy was Murad Chaudhary, who's from the local Bangladeshi community in Oldham. He's very embedded in the community. And I've worked with him before briefly around climate change, but he's never done anything as a part of his own practice. So I was trying to, we gave him a small commission to produce a piece of work specifically around Bangladesh, where he integrated photographs that he'd taken, some that friends of his had taken. So that's a kind of a set of artists who have got a lot of community links. And another section of it was working with lifelong learning in Oldham, which was 3 different groups working around developing English skills for people who have dyslexia problems at different levels, some advanced groups and some kind of very basic. what we found with both the Far Timor Women's Association and with the Lifelong Learning Group was, I mean, I've got a few shots here, but I haven't had time because we're literally just finishing the project at the moment to try and do a nice visual presentation of this. That really none of the people that I worked with, who are generally low income working class people, either from the women in Pakistan, who you know, some of them are really pleased if they manage to share their mobile phone. And when they kind, you know, we're sort of so used to having, you know, everyone's got a mobile phone in their house, but you know, we're talking of people with really low incomes, and also there were a number of interesting things that came out from the lifelong learning groups, where once they'd started to understand what climate change is, then they were asking questions like, well, how's it going to, you know, we were talking about Oldham being one of the, well, having the highest amount of child poverty in the UK, according to our ONS statistics. And some of the people in the group that I was working with, they said, well, how's that going to affect food banks? So and we're kind of moving into territory that really I felt that people haven't been talking about and asking and trying to look at how, you know, are there intersections, which is a terrible word to be honest, you know, are there overlaps between poverty, food banks, and people, and the fact that you know, wheat yields in the UK are down by 25%. The cost of food is projected to go up. So there are a number of impacts of climate change which are not the ones that we're used to talking about, but which I think are directly relevant to people. And those were really interesting to have come out, and things that are pointing directions for us to work in the future. We've actually produced, I'm going to share a screen again now, so we can just get a sense of some of the work. So it's begun to be compiled here on this website, the Crossing Footprints website, and the Climate Connections project. So we've got a number of, we actually did an event called Voices for Action, which where we presented a lot of this work and invited the communities that we're working in, as well as local artists and activists. And it's very much trying to look at, it's on, if you want to look at it, it's 3.5 hours long. I haven't had time to kind of chop it up into nice, neat little pieces. But the event itself was live streamed and it's still available on film. And the various videos that have been released are also available as well. The one from Emmanuella Yogalelo is possibly one of our featured ones. That's the one there. There's the Action is Needed, as well as the Years of Bad Habits from Bangladesh. So all these videos are available to view, and the whole series of videos. There's about 12 videos, I think, or 11, 12 videos altogether. They were shown as a video loop in Manchester Central Library, Oldham Central Library, Bremen Library, and Hamburg Library for a few weeks leading up to COP26. So so they've been shown online as well as in libraries on a public screen. And the groups that we're working with, you know, the feedback from the groups has been very much that they hadn't really understood, you know, the sense that is that they'd heard about climate change, they felt completely in awe, and as to people, when they heard other people talking about it, they felt very disengaged and not able to talk about it. Beginning to understand what it was in a very hands-on way. I can talk about the process if anybody wants to ask a question about how I actually worked with the group. But they felt kind of, they felt able to talk about climate change and feel as if they're part of a conversation and be able to understand what they hear on the news, which they hadn't done before. the women in Pakistan were able to understand what was going on in Pakistan and how it relates to the UK as a result of this. And I think they're all keen to do some more work. It's quite developmental, so it's not as if we got them to be out, doing policy changing campaigning or anything like that at the end. And I think that really, I'm very interested in developmental processes, moving away from what I often call a project mentality, which is kind of quite short term, and to try and see how people can gradually develop in communities to develop their abilities, as well as to develop a base of what they think needs to be addressed and how they perceive it. So I don't know where I'm up to with time.
Yeah, I was just about to interrupt. Actually, I hate to interrupt you because it's so interesting, but we are a bit over time now.
Right.
But thank you so much. And there will be opportunities for people to put questions at the end as well. So I'm sure people have loads of questions for that. Marianne's just having a few Zoom issues at the moment. So I'm just gonna do this little bit here. Thank you so much, Kooj. That was fantastic. It was really interesting. I'm sure people have lots of questions for that. I'm going to then, because we are a little bit over time, quickly. Oh no, I'm having some Zoom issues. Move on to Andrea, who's going to talk about the fantastic work that she's been doing in Liverpool. Andrea, do you want to? I'll spotlight you now.
Thank you. I've been doing recently. Now, I can't see the, just let me go like that, and then slideshow from beginning. Can you all see that now? Is that all normal screen? Okay. Phew. So I'll tell you a little bit about just my background. I started out, I did a fine art degree, over 20 years ago, and enjoyed it. Kind of, I don't know, it was kind of long story really, but I did enjoy the sort of social aspect of it and learning more about the university and the people and the place rather than the actual work, I suppose. And then I went back to university. I went to Leeds Beckett and studied landscape architecture, did a postgrad, and then I did a master's. And I wrote my master's thesis on, it was based in Liverpool 8, which is where I lived and where I still live now, about local residents and their views on urban nature. So what they thought of it, what if they were doing anything about it. So I completed that 10 years ago. And from that, I was really interested in the sort of the social justice for people and nature. So looking at bottom-up approaches to getting things done, really, and how top-down approaches don't really work unless you can meet in the middle and make things happen. So I started beekeeping 10 years ago during that course, just because someone said, why don't you learn about beekeeping? It's you'll learn a lot about gardens and nature. I just thought it's a very strange thing to do. But I did it, and I'm still beekeeping now. Got 40 beehives now all around Liverpool, and I'm using beekeeping as a tool to get people involved in their local environment. So it's not about forest in another country, another city. It's about what is on our doorstep and what we can do on our doorstep, from our gardens, from our streets, from our yards, what we can do collectively together and make it better for us and better for nature. So at that time, when I just finished university and just started beekeeping, I didn't have a job. So there was nothing around, like landscape architecture wise and nature wise. It's always down in London down in London. So I just thought, I'm going to make my own thing. So I set up my company, Bee for Biodiversity, CIC, 8 years ago, and kind of just been doing loads of work since then. So it's that element of build it and they will come sort of thing. So I've been doing loads of projects and teaching beekeeping. And as I was beekeeping, I go to a lot of meetups for established beekeeping groups around the country, and I'd noticed that typical demographic was I've coined this phrase. It's like pale, male, stale. It's a very kind of beekeeping's a very male-dominated hobby, profession, whatever you like. Middle class, retired. Guy's got his own house down south and doesn't have to worry about money, big garden. And I sort of made this phrase up, institutionalized exclusivity. which I'm quite proud I made that up. But it's kind of, that's the only thing that came to mind when I thought about the beekeeping world in the UK. And when I did my very first beekeeping course, it was taught really, really badly. It nearly put me off, actually. And it was very much smoke and mirrors kind of thing. It was like, oh, not for you, this is for us. It was like very much that kind of attitude. And a lot of negative deficit with their teaching resources and how things were kind of conveyed, and lots of jargon. And I can't stand jargon. So I just thought, you know what, I'm going to teach beekeeping. That I did 7 years ago. I'm going to teach it in a way where anyone, anywhere can get involved. Doesn't matter about their background, their colour, their gender, whatever. And I was keen on teaching the more hard to reach and hard to teach individuals, because they're the ones that are never going to get an opportunity to have a go at beekeeping. To them, it's just like, it doesn't even come across, into their sphere of thought. And so my experience, as I say, I've got built up to 40 beehives, so I've got quite a lot of experience and knowledge in beekeeping and teaching beekeeping. So as my business started to grow, I was working on different projects, and I now fortunately facilitate and create a lot of opportunities for young people, for disadvantaged, and I hate the word deprived and things like that, but areas like that where I just thought beekeeping should be for anyone, not just on your left hand side of the screen, male, middle class, retired. So it's got to be for everyone, and it's really effective for people to learn about their environment through the bees. So all my resources and everything is quite positive, and I kind of make them in a really easy to follow, very lots of pictures and things. So if English is not your first language, doesn't matter, because bees, they don't care if you're checking them. They don't care what language you speak, what colour you are, or anything. You go and check those bees. I'll just talk about 2 projects I'm working on at the moment. One of them is with Metal on 1 September. These are based in Liverpool, and it's called Be the Revolution. And the theme was human rights, and the other artists that also got the residencies, their approaches to what human rights are, how we should tackle it, are different. So mine was, we should all have a right to contribute towards a healthy local environment. So we should know about it, we should be able to make it better and kind of understand it more and make it part of a culture, really, and how kind of we work together, just like a colony of honeybees. They all work together to protect their own community, to future-proof themselves. And I think as a community in Liverpool, a lot of people are doing that, but there's maybe some gaps. So I just thought I'll fill that gap really in Liverpool. And I'm working in an area called Picton. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. It's kind of like eastish, central eastish sort of part of Liverpool. It's very, very diverse demographic. A lot of refugees and asylum seekers live in Picton Ward, and they're the ones, if I go back to my, Pale Male Stale and all that, they're the ones that are so far away from your typical demographic. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to kind of revolutionise it a little bit, starting in Picton, and work with local residents, families, kids through beekeeping. And so through the kind of course that the residency, I thought I don't want to be, teaching, talking a long time. I wanted to make something so where participants, they could touch things, tactile stuff, they could make things burn, understand why we use a smoker, put a bee suit on, have a go at a hive tool, look at things like that, because it's very, you've got to be very inclusive and accessible in this delivery, and that's what my approach is to my practice, to the art that I make. But whether that art is the outcome and the impact that comes out of it, or the whole process, is kind of like, it's probably a bit of both of those. So people having a go, visual, hands-on, it strengthens resilience that is already there and reinforces it. So a lot of the older immigrants, asylum seekers, they already knew about beekeeping. There was one lady whose English is like, probably second, third, fourth language. And she knew about pollen on a particular tree where she was from. And I couldn't believe it. She said she watched it, she saw the colour of it, she saw the bees flying out. And I was like, wow, that's like, more than what I would kind of know really about something like that. So the fact that they know, I can't assume, or none of us should assume that because they've come from another country, they don't know about anything, because they knew a lot of stuff, more than what I've taught at, kind of poshish schools in Liverpool. They knew so much more. and also kind of unlock memories really of people who've done this before back in Syria or Iraq or Yemen. I can never say that word right, Yemen. So they've done it before, so it just kind of unlocks memories that they can share that knowledge and experience with me and with the group, you know, with their own kids as well. They might not have known either. And there's no smoke and mirrors, pardon the pun with the smoker being used there, but there's no smoke and mirrors in how I teach. And teaching something to an idea or concept, teaching something like this with participants whose English is a second language or third or whatever, you know, you've got to be quite kind of hands-on and talk about things and use visuals. So it's not about the actual what you're talking, it's about how you say things and how you communicate. And the end of this project, I'm going to get participants to create resources from what they've learned and publish a zine I should say, as a way of their contribution, and they're being acknowledged in producing something. So there's that sense of ownership that you know, they've learned something, they've done it, and they've produced and they've created something that's going forward. The impact that has had, well, just it reinforces previous learning. It gives them a bit of confidence, immediate environment around them, because Picton is very it's quite grey. It's not, there's not much greenery around. There's like little pockets in places, quite industrial as well. So giving them that confidence to kind of look around and see that, you know, what can be changed, what cannot be changed, what they can do themselves, and also break down barriers of so the pale male stale sort of thing. So breaking down those barriers that beekeeping is for them, not for us. It's, you know, it's for anyone. So physical, psychological barriers broken down. A good opportunity for participants to learn, grow and develop. So you've sown that seed. So in this picture here, they're having a go at a honey taste challenge. So they've got to guess which one is real honey, is the local honey, the rest of them all supermarket ones. So just something as simple as that, because a lot of people I teach, it's like beekeeping, and the first thing to say is, oh, we're going to get honey, can we get honey? It's like, right, if you want that as your honey, you've got to learn A, B, C, D to get to the honey at the end. So by doing that, they might learn at the end, think, well, honey's not the be all and end all with beekeeping, because, you know, I don't kind of practice that it is, because it should be the last thing really on your mind when you're beekeeping. But learning all about different things in beekeeping. And yeah, part of a publish zine as well. So I will be getting that, yeah, ISBN logged to kind of, yeah, as a production of something. Oh, other end of the scale now, another project I work on, I say project, I'm a volunteer of this project, is the Friends of Sefton Park, which if you don't know Sefton Park, it's a biggest park in sort of central Liverpool. Beautiful park, best park in my opinion anyway. And the range of users that use Sefton Park is just, you know, kind of infinite really, the people that use it. And they all have that same common thing in common, is that they love Sefton Park. So whether they run there, walk the dog, take the kids to play football, play tennis, I don't know, whatever. And I found that I've grown up by Sefton Park and moved away, came back, live by Sefton Park now, and it's just part of me now. It's part of everything, kind of nearly every day I go. The previous group was inactive. I say that there was a group, but they were doing nothing, and I just thought, how can you do nothing in Sefton Park? You know, other parks groups in the city doing loads of stuff. So I spoke to the council, said, I want to do this, can I do this? And they were like, yeah, go for it. So started up 4 years ago nearly now, doing litter picks. Just started putting posters up in the park saying, do you want to do litter pick in Sefton Park? You know, little posters, and thought no one's going to come. No one's going. And 30 people turn up on the first go, and I was like, wow, you know, it's another one of those build it and they will come sorts of things. And I'm conscious about type of marketing and posters and flyers that I make for the park, because you have to be really inclusive, because you've got such a broad, you know, spectrum of people coming along, and make sure that the opportunities that you create, all volunteering ones, anyone can do it any time of day as well. You've got, I think for me, I'm fortunate that understanding people and kind of different situations, because you get people, as I say, all walks of life. Some people not left the house in a week. The only time they do it is to come to the park to litter pick, and that's completely fine. Some people, they come with their kids. Some kids, they come by themselves. You know, it's all being able to understand the background and kind of get them started up. The approaches to that, so the sorts of things that we do, is more kind of introduction to the park, you know, the park being more than a park. So doing that through guided walk, interactions. We did a foraging kind of walk. I didn't, someone else did, on the right hand side. So he was looking at the weeds, basically, which ones you could eat, leaves off trees, anything. So, you know, you kind of experience in the park in a new way. And also with people having short attention spans nowadays, me included, making resources, just being short and to the point and concise about what it is, what you're doing, what you're going to get out of it. Okay, yeah, I'll do it. And shift your perspectives on the park, so people think, oh, it's just a park. But when you look at the park, for example, the landscape design of the park, there are no right angles in Sefton Park to give that illusion of distance. And once you know that, like I've told you that now, if you go to the park and see no right angles, you'll think, oh yeah, everything is kind of curvy and it's all about, yeah, the illusion of distance. Like the park will look bigger than what it is. And that was the whole concept behind the design. The park, the classroom, really, not as, you know, you sit down at the desk at classroom, it's your classroom to take and learn as you will, and enables that self-development. So again, you sow that seed. No, there's no right angles. This is what it is. You look differently. And from that, hopefully you build up your understanding. Another big part of it, as I've known, as I've got to kind of learn really, is partnership working. So you can't work in a silo. You've got to work with other things that are going in the park. And you realise there's more people that use the park for their own projects, their own things than you know. Sefton Park gets absolutely, in a Scouse term, hammered for, you know, over summer, over the year, for things going on there. Recently there was a Pokemon, then there was a run, then there was, I don't know, something else going on, and these are over sort of like 2 weekends. So applications or invitations to create, just for people to think about what you can do if you want to do something. And these are my approaches of how I've done something, but you know, this might be helpful, might be doing it already, is just to look at the sort of concept of small is beautiful. So it was coined by Leopold someone, it was like used by Schumacher to kind of say small. We don't need massive big things to make changes. Everything starts small. If we work small and start together as all loads of little dots, we can join those dots and become a big dot, you know. So it's that sort of attitude, and always consider doing something local, something that you can do. It's on your doorstep, it's just down the road, it's in the park. Just do something local. Because I've heard about people who say, oh yeah, I help the environment, I donate to the polar bears or the, I don't know, penguins or whatever. You just think those things are so far away. You know, it's good that you can support, but if we do something on our doorsteps and we do it all together, and everyone around the world does it, you know, we wouldn't have to worry so much about all these other things going on in the world. Just stick with what you can do. Be the positive change to your local environment. Don't kind of give it all the, you know, as Greta Thunberg said, blah, blah, blah. Don't talk about it, do it. Your body where your mouth is. Greenpeace saying that is, just talk about it, do it. You know, because you get nowhere if you just keep talking about it. You become a bit annoying, really, if you keep, you know, negative about something. Turn it around, do something positive. Find out about local stuff going on. There's tons and tons in Liverpool. And yeah, I mean, I've got my my kind of contact details, social media on the last slide. So I post loads of opportunities and stuff, retweet stuff going on. Again, it's that, you know, if you build it, it will come. That's actually from that film Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner. So build it and they will come. And the best thing to do is to learn, do, keep that going, infinity, because the more you learn, the more you're going to be able to kind of understand and do as well. So that's just they're just my links there if you want to follow or, you know, have a look or whatever. But there's tons more I do, but they're only just 2 things that I work on. The end.
Andrea, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. It was great. 3 fabulous presentations, really different. And I love the range in scale and scope of work that the 3 of you have presented. We've gone from kind of small is beautiful to really large scale interventions and everything in between. It's been really fascinating. We've had 3 questions in on the chat so far. So I'm going to pose those to start with. But if anybody else would like to add questions, you can either put them into the chat or you can put your hand up or use your hand symbol, and I'll try and put those to the relevant people. If other members of our team could monitor hands as well, that would be great in case I miss anybody. So I'm going to just run through these questions in order. So the first one was from Kate, and it's directed to Jess. And Jess, Kate is interested to know how BP or not BPs run really. Is it volunteer? How do you work logistically? Where do your resources come from? Do you have a core team that develop the concepts, regular meetings? How does it work? If you could give us a bit of an insight.
Yeah, so can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we're an entirely voluntary group and always have been. So everything is kind of self-organized. We try and be as sort of non-hierarchical as possible and as welcoming to new people as possible. We have regular meetings, and when we've got a performance coming up, we'll have regular rehearsals. Although obviously with COVID, as I'm sure a lot of people have found with their practice, we haven't been able to meet in person, and that's been really, really challenging. It's much harder to be creative and bounce ideas around over Zoom than it is in person. But we just had our first rehearsal last week, which was really, really great. But what we also do, like, we don't have like a core membership that always organizes everything. It's always very much like who has the time and the energy for the next thing and who feels like they can commit, and then we sort of will form the core group that's organizing it from that. But also, like, as you've seen, we'll often jump off a particular exhibition that's on at the British Museum or something. So a really good example is 3 years ago they put on an exhibition of Assyrian objects, which was particularly upsetting and offensive to people with Iraqi backgrounds, because obviously BP played a huge role in pushing for war in Iraq in the first place, and then it's sponsoring an exhibition of Assyrian objects. So we ended up reaching out to the Iraqi and Kurdish community, and a few people joining us that have then stayed part of the group. So it's been really, really interesting. And like, they sponsored an exhibition of Indigenous Australia, and so we ended up reaching out to kind of Aboriginal Australian people and sort of forming long-term partnerships. So we now have a lot of different partnerships that we'll sort of draw on for different types of performance and different types of event. And with BP Must Fall, as you saw, we sort of brought everyone together and invited everybody in. It's like, let's just, you know, cover this from every angle that we possibly can.
And it's all voluntary and unfunded, Jess, is it?
Yeah, so our main funder has always been Lush, you know, the Lush Cosmetics, and they give us small grants of sort of 5 or 6 grand every year or so, because our only expenses are really transport, props and costumes. We always make everything ourselves, and then like we always pay our filmmakers and our videographers and our photographers, because that's really important, but they sort of get activist rates. So really it's a pretty cheap thing to do. The most expensive thing we've ever done was the Trojan horse, because obviously we needed to get proper carpenters and welders and things to make sure that it was safe and possible. So we crowdfunded for that. But normally it's actually a very, very cheap thing to run. And we just have this sort of probably core group of about 30 people that we draw on, and then maybe 15 will be organizing a particular performance at any minute, and that sort of shifts around. And I think that's really good for creativity as well, because it's like different brains and different skills and experiences. And some people have a background in theatre and performance and composition and choreography, and other people really don't, and sort of everybody's valid and everybody gets a chance to be part of the performance. We don't like cast people who have more experience or anything. We try and be, you know, as open and participatory, and to give people opportunities to perform if they want to, or whatever role they want to play.
Thank you so much. That was really thorough. I've got a lovely question now from Alison, which is for Andrea. Alison wondered, Andrea, have you ever tried to engage the stale, pale males with your work in Liverpool, or do you just avoid them at all costs?
Well, yeah, it's someone else came up with that pale male style. It wasn't me, by the way, but I just pinched it. I do. I mean, you can't kind of get away from pale male style. It's kind of terrible saying that now, but yeah, I do work with them, and they're also in Liverpool. They're also aware of the lack of diversity in beekeeping. But I kind of work with loads of different people, but I just have noticed the minority groups and, you know, everyone else that isn't pale male stale. I'm working with that. I want to work with them a bit more, really, and that's kind of the aim. But yeah, there's plenty of pale male stale in Liverpool.
Thanks, Andrea. Kooj, we've got a question for you here. It's about the process of working with the groups that you've talked about and how you get people practically engaging with climate justice issues who haven't been engaging previously. I think this is one that has real resonance for all of us. How do you incite that interest?
I think it's not a straightforward thing. What we mean engaging with climate, you know, practical activity is something that has to gradually emerge. I think there's something. Okay, there's a number of things going on here. First of all, when the very first time I met the group, I was actually online. Everybody was with masks, and you know, they had to go through some hoops for me to be able to physically go into the centre where I was going to be sort of running workshops. And so I just asked them to think of anything in the room that they're wearing, or that's in their bag, or furniture in the room, and we just went through. So they all picked random things, and we just went round and looked at how everything in the room, you know, was connected to climate change in some way. So that was the first introduction, because I was really wanting to make sure that what I'm talking about is within their immediate experience. Then we looked at issues going on in Oldham. So I really wanted to get away from these grand narratives that you see on TV, beautiful, you know, National Geographic style photography, you know, coffee tables kind of consumption of the issue, which is dominating us now. And I think that, and it's very alienating, unfortunately, all of that. It doesn't necessarily make you think that you actually want to do something. So, and people's realities are very different to that. Again, we talked about poverty in Oldham, how, you know, you say the Farmers Union in the UK, which is hardly a left-wing union, has come out saying how worried they are with the depletion of wheat growth in the UK, and how the quality of food is going downhill. So people are already eating crap food. It's just going to get worse. And people, you know, the people in the class that I'm talking to, they're directly impacted by that. Some of them have used food banks or still do. So, you know, these are issues that became very close to them very quickly, in a way which nothing else that they'd seen on TV or heard of before had ever done, really. And so they became really concerned about all the issues. And then again, with the Pakistani groups, I don't think they'd cottoned on to some of the. I think understanding climate change was a difficult one for everybody. I mean, I showed them this video where you swap the gas in this chamber, in this glass chamber, from between air and carbon dioxide, and an infrared camera at one end of the chamber is trying to look at a flame at the other end, and it just disappears when you swap this invisible gas. So when they saw that, I just saw this light bulb moment with everybody thinking, oh shit, so is that what happens? Because they actually saw it physically, and I don't think anybody had seen that. Most people probably haven't. And the idea that you look out the window and then all these cars are spewing this stuff all the time, you know, in a you know, and everybody's heating. So suddenly they got it just with that one simple thing, which a lot of people have not actually seen, because it has to be tangible. So all of those tangible kind of approaches, as well as keeping things very close to them.
A bit of a follow-on question here, Kooj, which might be interesting to just kind of feed into what you're talking about here. It's very relevant, which is from Kazia, and it's how you work with communities to get to the honest root of what it is that the community would really benefit from in terms of developing positive opportunities. So the way you're talking here about engaging people with the themes, I think, could you pick that one up as well?
Yeah, okay. I mean, what we're talking in terms of how people could become active, I think that in the time we had, we just got them to understand what it was and how they felt about it. And there's going to be a phase 2 that I need to raise money for, frankly, where we look at what they can do and what solutions. And that's a really hard one because, you know, in my opinion, everything that we're all doing right now, you know, wearing secondhand clothes and recycling stuff, it actually isn't making a difference to the overall progression of, you know, downward progression of the planet. And basically things aren't stacking up. So I'm very interested to look at what can we do that can start stacking up with all these lovely things that Jess and Andrea and me and God knows how many other people are doing. Unfortunately, they're not all stacking up at the moment. That's a massive question, I know.
And actually, if I could bring you to a close there, because I'm just conscious of time, it ties in beautifully.
One quick thing I'll say is that there are people in the class who want to learn enough English to become care workers and going to nursing and so on. The idea of the kind of lives that they've got don't give them much spare time to do. I think there has to develop pockets of activism which are not over on the street activism, which people can somehow fit into those kinds of lifestyles, and those overlaps, so people can see the overlap between their situation, food banks and so on, and other things. And that isn't happening at the moment. At the moment, you're either a full-on activist doing the stuff that I do and Jess does and so on, or you're not in it, and there has to be something in between.
Thank you, Kooj. That's really helpful and actually connects nicely into a question that's coming from Liz, which I'm going to suggest could maybe one of the topics of one of the open space rooms, which Marianne will introduce in a moment. And Liz is really interested to know how we might work together better to promote all the work that's currently going on around climate in the sector. How can we join up those dots, as it were, and become a multitude of opposition, if you like. So I'm going to hand over to Marianne now, just because I'm very conscious of time, and she will explain the next section of the event, and then we'll have a short break.